She called her cat's name from the kitchen doorway, the way she had 1,000 times before, and nothing happened. Not an ear turning, not a glance, nothing at all. She called again, louder this time, and it was right at that second moment, standing there repeating herself to a cat who was clearly awake and clearly fine in every other way, that it actually landed on her. Her cat had not ignored her. Her cat had not heard her at all. She told me afterward that she genuinely could not say when it had started. There had been no single dramatic day. Just a slow accumulation of moments she had quietly explained away. A cat that seemed to startle more when touched from behind. A cat that slept through the vacuum cleaner when it used to bolt from the room the second it switched on. Each one alone had seemed like nothing. Called together, from that one doorway, they were suddenly the entire story. I am Leon. I have spent a full 30 years in small animal practice and now work part-time, mostly with older cats. Hearing loss and vision loss are two of the things I see missed longest in this job. Not because they are subtle in themselves, but because a cat compensates for both so well, for so long, that an owner often only notices once the compensation itself starts to fail. Here is the mechanism. Both senses decline through mechanical wear rather than any single dramatic event. In the ear, the tiny structures responsible for picking up sound gradually lose sensitivity, starting almost always with higher-pitched sounds before lower ones, which is exactly why a cat can seem to ignore a doorbell while still reacting normally to a low, close voice for months longer. In the eye, the lens can gradually lose clarity, and the structures at the back of the eye that process light can lose sensitivity too, which is why vision loss so often shows up first, as trouble in dim light long before it shows up in full daylight. A cat with either change relies enormously on memory of a familiar space and on its remaining senses to cover the gap, which is precisely why the change can go unnoticed for so long in a home that rarely changes shape. This is also why the two senses so often decline together rather than one at a time, and why a cat losing both can look, for a while, almost entirely normal. Vision compensates for hearing, hearing compensates for vision, and touch and scent quietly cover whatever gap remains. It is only once a home genuinely changes, new furniture, a house move, a visitor moving something without thinking, that the whole compensation system gets tested at once. And that is very often the exact moment an owner finally notices anything was wrong at all. It is worth saying plainly that a cat losing one or both of these senses is not a tragedy in the way it can sound at first. Cats manage sensory loss remarkably well, largely because they rely so heavily on scent and memory already. The entire purpose of tonight's video is simply making the transition easier and safer, not treating it as an emergency every single time it happens. Number 1. Hesitating or bumping into things specifically at night or in dim rooms. A cat that navigates a bright room confidently but suddenly seems unsure or clumsy once the lights go down is showing one of the earliest and most reliable signs of vision loss, since the earliest stage of most vision decline in cats affects low light performance well before it affects daytime vision at all. Leave a soft nightlight on in the rooms your cat uses most after dark. This single change often restores enough visibility that an owner assumes nothing has actually changed, when in fact the cat has simply been given back the light it needed to keep coping the way it always had. Number 2. A visible change in how the eye itself looks. A cloudiness, a change in color, or a pupil that no longer seems to react normally to changing light are all worth a same day. Mention to your vet not because every one of them is serious, but because several of the conditions that cause them are considerably easier and cheaper to manage when caught early rather than once vision is already substantially affected. A phone photo taken every few months in the same lighting each time gives you and your vet something concrete to compare rather than relying on memory of what your cat's eyes used to look like a year ago. A general practice vet can usually assess this at a normal appointment cost and only refers on to a veterinary ophthalmologist at a considerably higher cost if something specific actually warrants the closer look. Number 3.5, if I can squeeze one in here. Genuine hearing loss versus what owners often call selective hearing are worth telling apart before you assume the worst. Call your cat's name from another room while they are clearly awake and not distracted by food, sleep, or another animal, and watch closely for even a small ear flick or head turn. A cat that responds to that test but ignores you constantly at other times most likely still hears you fine and is simply choosing not to bother, which is a completely different and far less concerning situation than one that shows no response at all. Number 3. No longer reliably catching or noticing a toy or treat tossed toward them. A cat that used to track a treat thrown across the room and now seems to miss it entirely, or only notices once it lands and the smell reaches them, is showing a sign that gets read as simple disinterest far more often than it should. Motion in the side field of vision is often one of the first things to go, well before central vision is noticeably affected. Roll a treat along the floor instead of tossing it through the air, and notice whether your cat tracks it any better along the ground than it does in flight. That difference alone is a genuinely useful detail to describe at your cat's next checkup. Number 4. No longer waking to footsteps, a door, or your voice from another room. A cat that used to meet you at the door the second your key turned, and now only appears once you are already inside and visible, is very often responding to hearing loss rather than simple laziness or disinterest. This is frequently the single sign that finally makes an owner suspect something has changed, since it removes a small daily ritual that quietly mattered more than most people realize until it stops. Stamp your foot gently on the floor as you approach a room your cat is in, rather than relying on your voice alone. Cats with hearing loss often still pick up the vibration through the floor long after the sound itself has stopped registering, which gives you a genuinely reliable way to announce yourself without startling them. Number 5. Meowing considerably louder than it used to, especially at odd hours. A cat that begins vocalizing more loudly, sometimes almost shouting where it used to simply meow, is frequently compensating for hearing loss in the same way a person with hearing loss often speaks louder than they realize, since a cat that cannot hear its own voice properly loses the natural feedback that normally keeps its volume in check. This is worth distinguishing gently from the nighttime crying covered in an earlier video on cognitive decline, since the two can look similar from a distance. A cat that is simply louder but otherwise calm and purposeful is more consistent with hearing loss. A cat that sounds distressed, lost, or confused while crying is more consistent with the cognitive picture, and either way, both are worth mentioning at a checkup rather than guessing between them yourself. Number 6. New anxiety specifically in dark, unfamiliar, or rearranged spaces. A cat that handles its regular familiar home confidently but becomes noticeably more cautious in a new room, a hotel, or a friend's house is very often leaning harder than it used to on memory of a space rather than genuine sight, and a genuinely unfamiliar space removes that safety net entirely. Bring a familiar blanket or bed to any new environment your cat has to spend time in. The scent alone gives a cat with reduced vision or hearing a reliable anchor point in a space it otherwise has no memorized map of at all. Number 7. No longer reacting to another pet, a visitor, or an approaching car the way it used to. A cat that no longer startles at another animal entering the room, or that a well-meaning owner starts allowing near a driveway or a road because it seems calm and unbothered, is facing a genuine physical hazard rather than a personality change, since a cat that cannot hear an approaching car or a warning bark has lost one of its main early warning systems entirely. Treat any cat showing hearing or vision decline as an indoor-only cat from that point forward, even one that previously had safe supervised access outside. This single change removes by far the largest physical risk this whole topic actually carries. Number 8. Trouble locating the food bowl, water bowl, or litter tray after any change to the room. A cat that manages perfectly well until a bowl gets moved a few feet, or new furniture blocks a familiar path, and then seems genuinely lost rather than simply annoyed, is showing how much it has come to depend on a fixed, memorized layout to compensate for reduced sight or hearing. Keep food, water, and the litter tray in the same locations once you notice any of this list, and if you do need to move one, move it gradually over several days rather than all at once, giving your cat repeated chances to relearn the new spot before the old one disappears from its expectations entirely. Number 9. Difficulty settling in a multi-cat household once ranking or routine shifts around them. A cat with reduced hearing or vision can lose track of where a more assertive housemate actually is, which sometimes leads to what looks like a sudden ambush, a swat or a hiss that seems to come from nowhere, when in fact the cat with reduced senses genuinely never saw or heard the other one approaching. Owners frequently misread this as a personality clash rather than a sensory one. Give a cat with declining senses a few safe, elevated resting spots that other pets rarely use, and consider separating feeding areas if ambushes around the food bowl become a repeated pattern. This costs nothing beyond a spare bed or blanket in a quieter corner of the home, and it removes a genuine source of daily stress for a cat that already has enough to manage. Here's what you can actually do tonight. Book a proper eye and ear check rather than assuming either sense is simply fading with age on its own, since several causes of both are genuinely treatable, and catching one early is consistently cheaper and considerably less stressful for your cat than managing an advanced version of the same problem later. A same-day visit is worth booking specifically if any change in the eye appeared suddenly rather than gradually, since sudden change carries a different urgency than a slow one. Walk your own home at your cat's eye level once at night, with the lights the way they normally are after dark. Furniture edges, stair drops, and low tables that are obvious to you at full height can be genuinely difficult for a cat working with reduced vision in low light, and this single walk-through often reveals 2 or 3 easy fixes you would never have spotted from standing height. Consider a simple textured pathway for a cat losing vision specifically, a different rug or mat placed along the main routes between the food bowl, the litter tray, and a favorite resting spot. Cats read texture through their paws remarkably well, and a consistent textured path gives a cat with reduced sight a reliable route it can follow largely by feel, at a cost of little more than a few inexpensive bath mats. Approach a cat with hearing loss from where it can see you coming, rather than reaching in from behind or above, and get gently into its line of sight before making contact. A startled cat that cannot hear you approaching can lash out purely from surprise rather than aggression, and this single habit prevents almost all of those moments before they ever happen. Think honestly about stairs specifically if your cat is losing vision. A cat that has always managed the stairs confidently can genuinely struggle once low light vision starts to go, particularly on a dim staircase or one with an open, see-through design. A stair gate at the bottom overnight, or simply leaving a light on above the stairs after dark, removes a fall risk that costs nothing to fix once you know to look for it. I've put together a fuller guide covering a simple at-home test for early vision and hearing changes, a room-by-room home safety checklist, and how to introduce a scent and vibration-based routine that helps a cat with reduced senses feel secure again. It is linked below if tonight's video has left you wanting to go further. None of this replaces your own vet-specific judgment for your specific cat, and any sudden total loss of vision, bumping into everything overnight rather than gradually, or any injury from a fall or a collision, always means a same-day visit rather than watching and waiting. This list is about the slow, gradual version underneath that, the one that gets explained away as personality far more often than it should. Ask your vet plainly what a full senior sensory check actually involves before your next visit, rather than assuming it happens automatically as part of a routine appointment. A proper look at both ears and both eyes, alongside the usual weight and general exam, is a reasonable thing to specifically request, and most practices are glad to walk you through roughly what that adds to the cost of a normal checkup. So nothing about the bill comes as a surprise afterward. It is worth remembering that a cat losing one sense often becomes noticeably more reliant on the others, so protecting whichever senses remain matters just as much as adapting for the one that is fading. A cat losing its hearing benefits enormously from a home that stays visually and texturally consistent. A cat losing its vision benefits from an owner who talks to it more, not less, since a familiar voice becomes a considerably bigger anchor once sight can no longer be relied on the way it once was. She told me, weeks after that moment in her kitchen doorway, that once she actually knew, everything about living with her cat became easier rather than harder. She stopped feeling ignored. She started stamping her foot instead of calling out and touching him gently on the shoulder before picking him up rather than from behind, and within a couple of weeks he seemed calmer around her than he had in months, simply because she had finally stopped asking a sense he no longer fully had to do all the work alone. That is genuinely the whole shift this video is asking for. Not treatment, not a cure, simply meeting a cat exactly where its senses actually are now, rather than where they used to be a few years ago. It is a small adjustment on your part for a genuinely large improvement in how safe and settled your own cat feels every single day from here forward, and that is a trade well worth making for any owner willing to notice it.